Good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you here, and it is great to welcome all of our college students and their family. Any college students here today? Like 4 of them? Perfect, good. Good, we are so glad you guys are here. For those of you, this is why College Road is such a disaster right now. It's because all these guys are here. I'm just kidding. We're really glad to have you guys. This is kind of the start of a new season. And one of the things that I wanted to do, as I was thinking about today, is trying to, I went back to my own college experience, which wasn't that long ago. It's longer ago than I want to admit, but it was, went back and tried to think of what it was like and what I would have appreciated knowing when I started. And so that's how I want to kind of address this today. I'm really glad you guys are here. We take a huge responsibility to be entrusted with you and your time and with all the things you'll have going on to be a part of your lives for 4 years or 5 years or 6 years or however long it is that you're here. And but it's not just that we feel honored by being entrusted and having a voice in your life. It's actually what you guys do for our church. Like, you become a part of us, and it causes us to become something more than we currently are. So it works both ways. And so at the start of a new season, there's a lot of opportunities for us. New friends, every experience is new. There's a sense of freshness to it. In fact, I remember when I went to college, I moved about 50 miles from my house. I moved into a dorm. And I remember going up to college and thinking, man, this is a really good opportunity for me, because high school wasn't super kind to me. I was kind of small and kind of dorky. I just wasn't like that guy in high school. So I just kind of made it through. I was glad I did. Went to college. I thought, man, I've got a chance to really impress people. So I thought about, what can I tell people? I thought, man, I could tell them I was like the star of the football team. I was like, there was no social media back then. You could tell them whatever you wanted. That's all they had was what you said. Yeah, I was like 6'4", 220, playing football. But, summer was kind of tough for me. I lost a step or two. So I'm here at college. You could tell them whatever you wanted to tell them, and they don't have anything to go by. And so I was trying to think of, like, what kind of person do I want to be? I can just tell them anything. And so it was this opportunity to kind of rebrand myself, to restart some things. And the reality is, what we think is that some life-changing moment is going to be this thing, this one decision that you make that sort of sets the trajectory for everything else. And what I learned in college, and what I want to sort of help you understand today, and then tell you something you can do today, is that your life isn't changed in one moment in time, one decision that you make that sets things in one direction or another. Your life is changed one decision, one choice at a time, over a long period of time. And if you can understand this, you begin to understand what it means to be entrusted and given, and what you have in front of you as you get to create your future. And the reality is all of us have that same opportunity in this new season we're beginning. We've got the fall coming. We've got a lot of things that are sort of getting back into rhythms, or whatever rhythms are anymore. We don't know what that is anymore. We have all these opportunities, and I want to just sort of invite you into this journey together as we talk about not only who you are, but how is it that you become who you are. The choices that you make in this new season, they will start habits. The things that you start will affect you. The things that you start will bring shape to you. Some of the things that you start, you will not be able to stop. For example, like watching The Outer Banks. Right? I don't know how many of you guys have seen The Outer Banks. How many of you guys, has anybody seen The Outer Banks? Okay, yeah. It's like that thing you really don't want to admit you've done, but like everybody's done it. And I remember I watched season 1 at the beginning of quarantine, and I hated myself after every episode. And then season 2 comes out, and you're like, oh, here it is. And you watch the first, and you're like, oh, that was so terrible. I can't believe I just wasted brain cells on that. Let's start the next episode. The other night we were there, and I was like so embarrassed. Like, my daughter, she's college age, some of her friends came over, and Julie and I were sitting on the couch. We were in episode 10 of The Outer Banks, and we were embarrassed as they came in, and I was like, oh yeah, we're already in episode 10. Oh, we watched that like weeks ago. We're like, oh, good, we're not alone. Like, it's just like gets into your blood. You can't like help but watch like a long train wreck for like 10 episodes. And you can't take your eyes off of it. And the thing is, this is how a lot of what the decisions you're going to make feel like. It's not an addiction. It's not something that's going to sort of, derail everything. But what it does is it begins to catch your attention. There are all sorts of things that you'll experience that will capture your attention. What you need to understand is that what catches your attention will eventually capture your affection. And it's going to just begin to affect and shape who you are inside and the parts of you where you most need to find life. One of the things that I believe as a pastor, as a human being, is that you have been created by God and you have been created for God. And I say this because what a lot of you think is that if you can just pick the right major, you'll find your purpose in life. Or if you can just meet the right person, then you'll find your purpose in life. If you can just get the right job, then you'll find your purpose in life. Some of you are still chasing that. And what I want for you to understand is this, that you will never find your meaning and purpose for your life apart from God. Because if He has created you and He's intended you and He's made you for yourself, you will never find what you're looking for apart from Him simply because you were made for Him. So how you address this or deal with this and what you believe about this is the most important thing about you. Some of you come from school, from Christian backgrounds where you sort of have faith, and now you're bringing that faith, and now you're gonna have questions about what you believe and why you believe. And those are all critical questions for you to ask. You should always be asking questions. You should always be sort of wrestling and wondering because God's always doing something. But what you need to understand is that what you believe is the most important thing about you. And what you're gonna learn in these next 3 or 4 years is not just what you know, not just facts about things, but what you believe enough in order to arrange your life around. So that's what I want for us to talk about and to address. If you've been around Port City for any length of time, you've seen how I think of human beings. Human beings essentially have 3 components. We are made up of our heart, our mind, and this incredibly efficient thing called the body. That's not your body, just a representation. And how we handle each of these things matters, and you already know this, right? You already know this. Your body, the way I define this is really simple, but your body is simply where your life gets experienced and expressed. It's sort of the physical part of who you are. And you already know this because some of you are already struggling with this. Maybe it happened in middle school. Maybe it happened in high school. Maybe it's just now happening. And you sort of don't like the way you're presented to the world, so you're kind of obsessed with that. For some of you, it's sort of a source of your pride. For others of you, it's a source of your shame. And the question is, what is it about this body that we've been given? Does it have a purpose? Does it matter that we don't look like what we think we ought to look like, that we look like we do? These are all important questions for you to think about, to ask, to consider. Because what you believe about those things will determine what you arrange your life around. So there's this physical thing that we have, but you're not just your body, and you know this, or else we wouldn't have a thing called mental health, which you talk about so much now. This is your mind. And the mind is sort of this internal space. It's the place where we process our internal worlds and its relationship, or our relationship to the world around us. It's where all the sort of, in my mind, it's where the monkeys live. It's all the chaos that we experience in our heads. It's oftentimes the hardest thing for us to get our heads around, pardon the pun. But it's the place where you process your internal world, what you feel, what you think, what you believe, what you hope, what you dream. It's all those things go in. And there's the heart. And the heart is this seed bed, or this foundational place, the seat of your identity, who you actually are. Who you actually are. Who you actually are, and it's the place from which all of your life flows. And when these things are all working in harmony, right, we call it integrity. Integrity is not telling the truth. Integrity is wholeness. So these things all work together. But we probably all know what it's like for these things to pull in a million different directions, even though there's only 3 things. That sometimes what our heart wants, our bodies resist, and sometimes what our bodies want, our hearts resist. And then our brains are just left sort of in this wacky space trying to figure it all out. We don't have any foundation upon which we can build. And your heart's always trying to sort of say, hey, look, I'm supposed to be alive. I'm supposed to come alive. I'm made for something. And this part over here is going, do people like me? Do people trust me? Am I worthy? What's all the questions that are happening over here and the way we present ourselves? And it's all this chaos in between. What you're looking for, what you've been made for, has actually been created and designed. And one of the things I want you to understand is you come into this church, right? We've been talking about this the last 5 or 6 weeks, really the last 3 or 4 years as a church. But that the message of the Bible, the message of the gospel is not about believing the right things in order to pass a cosmic test when you die so that you get into this place called heaven. That is not what the gospel is about. The gospel instead is about the reality that Jesus came to us, God came to us to demonstrate his love for us, to purchase us back, to redeem us for that which we have been made. He came to get you, to redeem you for the purpose that he has intended for you, for the life that he's called you and created you and wants to equip you to live. Now recognize these are big and these are bold statements, but what your responsibility is in this, your responsibility, especially as you're sort of moving out of the faith that you have grown up with, and you're moving into a faith that needs to become yours, because you're gonna have a faith system. You're gonna have one. You're gonna believe something about something. You're gonna have beliefs about the world around you. You're gonna have beliefs about purpose. You're gonna have a belief about money, about a good job, about a good education, about sex, about marriage. You're gonna have beliefs about all those things. So you're gonna make decisions according to them. The question is, are those beliefs gonna be strong enough and foundational enough to support the weight of who you're actually created to be? That's a big question. And it's your responsibility to sort that, to consider that, to wrestle that. It's our responsibility for us to do it together. That's what the church is for. We help one another to walk with God because we believe that's what we've been called and created to do. So Proverbs 4:23 says this. It says, above everything else, guard your heart, for from it flow the wellsprings of life. Above everything else, above everything else, above everything else, make sure that this thing right here is guarded. And what does he mean? Some of you got a guarded heart, right? You built walls up so high, nobody can get in. That's not what he's talking about. To guard your heart. The instruction is to guard it. And what I think this means is to be fierce in protecting it from anything that undermines God's work in forming you and who you've been created to be. Anything. Things you set your eyes on, things you let into your mind, things you worry about, things, all these things. You fiercely go after anything that undermines who it is that you've been created to be, who you've been called to be, the kind of person that God has created you to become. What you'll begin to see is there's a role for each of these things in here. In fact, you'll start to see language like this in the Bible. When I was a youth pastor a while ago, I was about 26 or 27 years old, 25 years old, 26 years old. And I was a youth pastor, and we used to go and we used to do mission trips in areas. And one of the things we would do is we would do backyard Bible clubs. And backyard Bible clubs where basically you get kids from the neighborhood, you bring them out, you have it in somebody's backyard, they all come over, you play like crafts and games and such, and you tell them about the love of Jesus, right? That's what you do. You bring them out, you give them like this nasty Kool-Aid and peanut-free cookies, and you tell them about the love of Jesus, and you play games with them. And I was pretty competitive growing up. I had two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother, so I had to kind of make my way. So I had a little bit of a competitive streak in me. This is an important note in this story I'm about to tell you. And so one of the games we were playing is animal relay. The animal relay is where you line all these kids, they're like 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. You line them up, and they're in two lines. You know how relay races work, right? You run down around the cone, you come back and tag the person, the next person goes. Right, everybody knows what a relay race is. The difference is in an animal relay, you call out an animal. And so you call out an animal, and whoever's the first person to get, you call out an animal, and you go, chicken. And then you have to run down like a chicken, right, around the cone and run back like a chicken, and then touch the next person, and they go, kangaroo. And then you have to hop like a kangaroo all the way down, and then hop back, and you get down. This had gone on. We were like, 10 people on each team. We've been going. It's a tight race. We're coming in. I'm like the anchor person, and Sarah's the anchor person. Sarah's like 6 years old. And so we're here, we're ready, we're like on the mark, and here comes the person back. Now, just so you know, this is right after Jurassic Park had come out. And I was a huge fan of the Velociraptor. And I could do a Velociraptor imitation really, really well. And so I would like crouch down, and he would spring into action, right? So I was crouched down, I would spring into action. What I would do is just sound something like this. And so that was this velociraptor. So back to the story. We're down. He's coming. He tags. I said, velociraptor. And Sarah passes out, and I won. Now, here's the thing. Sarah thought we were playing a game. I came to win a war. Do you see the difference? And a lot of you, what happens is, you showed up here thinking this is a game. You showed up here thinking this is a game. The choices and the things that you let into your heart, let into your mind, the relationships that you dabble with or play with or experiment with, that it's a game. And it turns out that it's a war. This is exactly how it's described all throughout the scripture. The Apostle Simon Peter would write this in his letter toward the end of the New Testament. 1 Peter chapter 2, he says this, Dear friends, I urge you, as strongly as I can, I urge you, as strangers and exiles, as people who aren't built for what this world seems to pull us into. I want you to abstain or flee or guard yourself from all these things that you're prone to chase, from sinful desires, which do what? Wage war for your soul. They wage war over that which is going to serve to integrate these things and bring the life that you have meant to. They wage war against these things. You'll see this language throughout. You see this idea when Paul talks about the body over here. He writes this, and it's really interesting. Jesus talks about this. The scriptures talk about this quite frequently. And he says that this is the will of God. This is in 1 Thessalonians. This is the will of God, your sanctification, your holiness. The will of God for you is that your life actually reflect the way in which you have been created and made. That's his will for you. He doesn't care if you do that as an architect or a lawyer. That's not the point. The point is he wants you to become who it is that he's created you to be. That's what he's after. And then he tells us, he says, I want you not to get sucked in to all the sexual chaos. It's interesting. This could have been written today. Don't get sucked into, we talk this around here, but our culture is just inundated, and it continues to press on the next generation. I wish I could avoid this, but it continues to press on you, this sort of hypersexualization, everything that has created sexual chaos in our culture, and it is not without effect on our hearts. It is not without effect on our minds, and it is not without effect on our bodies. And you cannot abdicate your responsibility to, above everything else, to guard your heart, because it's a war. It's a war for your soul. And so what Paul says is that, so what we do is we learn how to possess our bodies, to possess them, to discipline them, to make them do what we want them to do, and not just be prone to whatever we feel like doing in the moment. And if you're an athlete, you already know this. No one is ripped on accident. How'd you get that body? I just woke up like this. No, you're like dying and red, because you know if you do what you want to do, you're just gonna lay on the couch, right, and do nothing, but you have to force yourself. You have to force yourself to move. You have to force yourself to work out. It's a discipline. You tell your body, this is what you're going to do. In fact, we tell this, that your mind actually tells your body. If you watch the Olympics, you see this. You know these guys give out. They have no physical strength yet, but they will themselves. Because he says that we possess our bodies in holiness and in honor. And you've got to believe that. I can't believe it for you. But what you allow to govern is going to make a difference, right? So he says over here that our hearts are to be guarded, our bodies are to be ruled. They're to be forced into submission. Your body is a great servant. It is a terrible master. And this is so important for you to kind of get this, at least in your sort of frame of what you're going to believe about things, because it's important. It's critical. Because these two things pull. And what I've learned is that the war for your heart, once you sort of get this at least wrangled, the war for your heart is fought in the battle of your mind. And here's what Paul says in Romans chapter 12. It's actually throughout the scriptures. Romans 8, Paul writes this previously in the letter. He says that the mind that is set on the flesh is death, but the mind that is set on the spirit is life and peace. The mind set on the things above brings something into our hearts. There's something about our minds, and here's how Paul sort of summarizes this process and what I think is really the key for us today. He says, do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world. You can read this thing, it's on the screen. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world. Don't just be pulled into anything that attracts your attention, but rather be transformed. Become this. Become who you were intended to be. How? By doing what? You can say it out loud. Renewing. This isn't just like talking to yourself. This is like a washing. To renew something was a baptism, was an immersion, was a wrestling, was a wringing out. To renew, this is a war, remember? To renew your mind. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that somehow this war causes or allows what happens in here to become something. And as long as this is governed well, eventually this is going to catch up and it's going to come out of you. That's how we're designed to work. Now, a lot of us have this idea that our brains sort of look like this, just full of like ping pong balls. And that thoughts are like these little things that just sort of pop in like this. It's like, oh, boom, and they just kind of come and go. And whenever you happen to be thinking about this direction or thinking about this direction, and some of you live your lives like this, whoo, y'all are not gonna do that, do you? I can't. So you're trying to juggle your thoughts, trying to figure out what you believe, and it's just all over the map. And if you're over here, this thought seems to matter. If you're over here, this thought seems to matter. A lot of you think that your brain is just like this, just full of all these like loose thoughts bouncing around. That's not how your brain works at all. Your brain begins with one thought. And then what it immediately does, because your brain tries to connect a story to close the loops, is it pulls all these together and it creates a train of thought every single time. And you know this to be true. The first thought that you think about something, the first thing that grabs your, oh, this is what I'm thinking about this, immediately pulls with it a whole narrative of everything else. And here's how, we've taught this a million times around here. Here's how you know this, because every time someone pulls that in front of you, you never say, oh, I bet they're just trying to get to the grocery store to feed their hungry kids. Because what would that do? I will gladly let you in. In fact, let me follow you to the grocery store and let me buy your groceries for you, right? Do you see how different that story would be? What's the problem? This person's from New Jersey, and they probably, and their mama is, and they blah, blah, blah. And you got this whole thing, you've already created this whole story about them that you would swear is true. And that's why they cut you off. Because they're this kind of person. Some of you, this is the story of your marriage. This is your fights. Every fight in your marriage is completely predictable because you say this, and she says, oh yeah, and then you got this whole story that just keeps repeating itself over and over again. For some of you, this is your experience with your kids or your parents. And the reason is because we don't ever think anything different in that first thought. Nothing changes here, and if nothing changes here, nothing changes here. This is not a joke. If you want to be transformed, you need to figure out a new story. For some of you, your story is, I'm worthless, I don't matter, I don't belong, no one will notice, I'm ashamed, I've done this, and it just brings with it the same narrative that you've been believing and living in the whole time. And you don't know how to break it. And so what you end up doing is you either end up pretending and trying to rebrand yourself, or you hide and hope that no one ever finds out. And my question is, what do these do to your heart? Does hiding and pretending help you become more alive? Right? So here's the question. The question is, what is it that is forming your heart? What is it that is shaping your heart currently? Maybe a better way is, what will shape your heart? What will you do in the next 3 days, 5 days, 2 weeks, 2 months that will shape your heart? What Jesus invites us to do is to seek first his kingdom He promised us his presence. He gives us his Holy Spirit. What the Holy Spirit does is the Holy Spirit works inside of us. It starts to shape and form here. And we want our thoughts to be aligned and aware of what Jesus has said and what he intends and what he means, so that our hearts begin to take that shape. To guard your heart means that you wage war against anything that threatens what it is that God has said about you. I remember this happened for me quite specifically when I was in college. And I was growing resentful because when I went to college, I decided that I was going to, most of my friends, most people I know, this is a little while ago, same story, different era. I went to college in the 80s, late 80s, and I remember going to college and trying to decide what kind of person I wanted to be, right? I couldn't get away with telling people I was 6'4", 220, that would never work. What if I was the party boy, or would I be like the good Christian kid that I had been in high school? Like, which identity am I going to pick up? And so I decided that I was going to kind of wrestle this out. I didn't know it at the time how profound this would be, but I began to wrestle out. I said, okay, God, here's what I've believed you my whole life. And I really want to believe you. I want to know what you want me to do. I want to know those things. I really do. But I'm also terrified that if I continue in this path, that it will be to no avail. That I'm going to end up being good and nothing good is going to come from it. I'm going to be good. I'm going to miss out all the fun of my college experience. You guys heard that? Here's another kind of news flash. If college is the best 4 years of your life is probably going to be terrible. I mean, think about it. You're like 22 years old and it's just a downhill slide for the next 50. That is no good. So I remember thinking about this, like really cognitively trying to get my head around this. I said, okay, God, here's what I want to do. Because my faith, I had to stop being the faith that what I had heard from my parents, and it had to become what I actually believed about things. And so I'm making this transition, and I said, okay, God, here's what I'll do. I'm gonna live for you. I'm gonna try to do what it is that you've asked me to do to the best that I can, and try this. And if at the end of, and I think I gave him like 80 years. I said, if I'm 80 years old and you still haven't satisfied me, then I'll go buck wild and do my own thing. So I'm like 30 years into that adventure right now. And so that was my heart. And all the while, there were all these things that were sort of threatening who I became, because it wasn't easy. There were temptations and there were struggles. And there were times when I thought, this is all for nothing. God has forgotten about me. God doesn't care about my fun. He doesn't understand how hard it is to be this kind of person in this kind of world. Dallas Willard, one of my heroes, he wrote this. He said, circumstances and other people are not in charge of who you become in the life that lies endlessly before you. Circumstances and other people are not in charge of who you become in this life that lies endlessly before you. And so my question to you is, do you believe that? Do you really believe that the circumstances that you've grown up in, the situations that you've faced, the things that have happened to you, do they affect you? Of course they do. Are they in charge of who you become? Do you believe that? Other people are not in charge of who you become. Whatever the crowd's doing, whatever the pressure from all your friends or whatever the expectations of other people are not in charge of who you become. Do you believe that? If circumstances and other people are not in charge of who you become, then who is? And what most people are going to think, especially Americans, we're going to think, I am. Good luck. That is breeding ground for anxiety and insecurity and fear and covering and projecting. You know why? Because you've been made by God and you've been made for God. When I was in high school, I memorized this verse. And the verse simply said, I am confident of this very thing, that he who begins a good work in me is faithful to bring it to completion. I am confident that God, who has begun this formative work in my heart, is completely faithful to see it through to completion. How different is that story? God, I'm confident that you are faithful to complete everything that you intend to do in my life. And I began to let him be responsible for the person that I became. How did I do this? I spent time with him. How did I wrestle with this? There were promises that he gave to me. Like that I take every thought captive and I set it up as obedient to Jesus Christ, that I had the capacity to think and to set these things up towards the purposes and the call that God has on my life. It was a constant war. It's not a game. I don't want to pretend that if you just do these three things, your life will be different. It is a war for your soul. Do not underestimate it. But I will tell you, the stakes are high. The stakes are high. There's a promise in Isaiah 23. I want you to look at this on the screen. He says, you keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on the Lord. The thing that you set your sights on, the thing that gets your attention will eventually get your affection. The reason that he provides perfect peace is because we live in a relationship with him, because we trust in him. Do you believe him enough to trust him? So there was a crucible moment for me. I'll never forget this when I was in college. A lot of my friends were partiers, and they would always invite me out. They were very kind. Mike, you want to go? And I would say no. We were all friends, and I liked them. You know how college is, and I would say no. And this is not like a hero thing. I just had tried to say, God, I want to do what you've asked me to do. So I was in my dorm room, spent there a lot by myself at times. Just in my room, all my friends were out. I worked hard in college. I was not like a super smart, gifted student, so I worked extremely hard in school. And I had friends of mine that they partied all the time. They went to class hungover. They had all the girls. And they like making straight A's. You know how that feels? You ever felt like that? You're like, Gah! And I remember just thinking that I'm wasting this experience. So one night I'm in my room and I was a Christian. I believed in Jesus. And so I opened up my Bible. I said, I guess this is like the good Christian thing to do. And so I opened up to Psalm 73, and this is what I read. Because I was struggling. But as for me, my feet have almost slipped, and I've nearly lost my foothold. You ever read the Bible, and you're like, somebody gets me? And then what the psalmist does is he goes, I've envied the arrogant. I've been envious of them. They get they're wicked and they still get what they want. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. And I just added in, they make good grades. They get all the girls and everything else I just added in. And then he just whines to God. And I'm like, man, I am digging this. This is a great thing. Just get and have a whine set. Just whine to God. Just complain and whine. That's what he's doing. Then he gets into verse 12, and I don't know, or 13, I don't know that anybody's ever gotten, I don't know that God has ever gotten me so deeply. It says, surely in vain I have kept my heart pure. I'm like, there it is right there in the Bible. I'm going out drinking right now. And I kept reading. And the complaining and the whining and the fear and the, oh my gosh, I'm missing out, begins to turn into communion. Somehow the psalmist gets ushered into God's presence. And he says, oh Lord, you are my strength. and my portion. Oh Lord, you are enough. And then at the very end, there's like this line in the sand. But as for me, no matter what anyone else says, but as for me, the nearness of God is my good. And I just grabbed that with everything that I had. God, no matter what I feel, no matter what I think, no matter how tempted or how afraid of missing out I am, I'm going to hold on to the fact, to the reality that the nearness of God is my good. I'm going to try to live in that. I'm going to try to walk in that. And I'm going to trust that you are going to be faithful to complete that which he's begun. Now, I'll admit, I'm only 50. The jury's still out. But I can tell you it was those choices at 21, 19, 18, 17 years old against everything that I felt that God has used, not to make everything work out, because that ain't how it works, but he's used it to form something in me, to do something in me, to cause me to become in ways that I wouldn't trade anything for. What is shaping your heart? Are you becoming more guarded, more suspicious, more distrusting, more hidden, more afraid? Or are you becoming more alive and more full, more free? I'm confident of this very thing. The God who has begun the work, brought you here today, is completely faithful to complete that which he's begun. Do you believe it enough to arrange your life around it? Let's pray together. Father, thank you that you are more faithful than I've ever dreamed of being, and that you have guarded my heart. In ways that I'm profoundly grateful for. And Father, my prayer is that as we're trying to muster faith in this room and to start this new season well, that we would find a sense of freedom that you are unbelievably capable of doing it for us if we fix our eyes on you. So I pray that our eyes will be lifted, that you would get our attention, and over the course of days and weeks and months and years, you would get our affection. That our lives would simply be full reflections of everything that you have intended for us to be. What a beautiful picture and a beautiful call. I'm grateful that you've made that available to us in the way of your son, Jesus. I'm thankful that you preserve us with your presence as your Spirit forms us with every choice, every act of faith, every step. So, Father, I just pray that you would use this as a moment among many others to remind us, to call us. And so, Father, I ask all this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.